T.S. Eliot has written a poem called Four Quartets, and in it he says, quote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and at the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time," end quote. So I'm hoping that this month you'll go on a journey with me to explore place in our habitual thoughts, in our culture, in the biblical text, and then at the end of the month, perhaps arrive home knowing place a lot better than you knew it when you left, knowing place in ways that reveal and reflect God's intentions. You have to remember that from the beginning, land, place was part of us. Creation was not complete, God said, without humans. Humans were created from the dirt. God covenants in the garden with both land and relationship. Later, more relationship, then land again. And always with the intention of blessing others from our use of the land. Humans were gifted, actually, with tending the land in ways that reflected God's character, with mercy, with graciousness, with steadfast love, compassion, fidelity, generosity, and forgiveness. Ordering the land and ourselves to reflect the character of God meant being a blessing to all the other nations. That made that possible. And when we failed to live that way, we lost the land that God gifted us. So what we heard Hank read in Deuteronomy 6, known as the Great Commandment, when we hear it read, we think about it in relationship, I think, more to covenant and response. But the land is referenced twice before you even get to the command, the land that God gives us, and a land of milk and honey. And then if you continue to read in Deuteronomy 6, you hear land referenced 5 more times. On the other hand, covenant and land aren't really mentioned a whole lot in the New Testament. We just don't hear that conversation. And I think we've made an assumption that land is not as important as it was in the Old Testament. Once Jesus gets here, then you spread this word to the ends of the earth, but particular parcels of land don't enter into the conversation. So I'm grateful for the work of Leonard Hjalmarsson, who is the author of a great little book called No Home Like Place. And in this book, his research, his scholarship, he proposes that the covenantal relationship is so deeply ingrained in the minds of Jesus and his disciples and the Jews that follow him, and Paul, who was a deeply practicing Jew, that it was just like the air they breathed. They didn't have to talk about it. Everybody just knew about it. And with that perspective, I want you to listen for our second reading, the living word of the Lord from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, verses 22 to 25. Jesus and his disciples are in Jerusalem. They are at the Passover feast. And listen for covenant. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take it. This is my body." And then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many," he said to them. "Truly, I tell you, I will not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new in the kingdom of God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Alan Durning, who is a researcher for the World Watch Institute, describes an experience that took him back home to Seattle to put down roots in a particular place. So he tells the story of being in the Philippines, where he was interviewing members of remote hill tribes about their land and their livelihoods. And he was escorted all one day by the tribal chief, who showed him trees and streams and land that the tribe had kept and tended for centuries. At the end of the day, the chief took him to meet one of the elders of the tribe, a woman that was considered to be a priestess and was highly revered by her tribe. She and Durning sat under a sacred tree that was close to her farm and looked out over the Maasam River. And as they chatted, she turned to Durning and she said, "What's your homeland like?" And there was a very long silence because Durning couldn't answer the question. He was thinking, well, my base is in Washington, D.C., and I have an apartment there, but no roots. And with growing embarrassment, he finally answered, well, in America, we have careers, not places. And then he was overwhelmed by the pity he saw in her eyes. All of us, all humans, see our worlds through deep biases and particular perspectives that come from our experiences, and that shapes who we are and what else we actually see. The indigenous priestess immediately saw the deep poverty of no place in Durning's life. And Durning hadn't even noticed that until he was able to see it through her eyes. So as our world switched into modernity, a couple of things happened that significantly changed our perspectives. A couple of biases came into our mindset. The first thing that began in the Enlightenment was we expanded our horizons and abilities in scientific research. And that moved us from a focus on place and people to a focus on time and space. And now most of our conversations around the cosmos are about time and space. And place and people has become only a very, very small segment of what is considered to be much more important. And God, while becoming larger and more vast to cover the whole time and space continuum, at the same time became far less particular, meaning one-on-one, close. And God also became far less important to our lives. The significance of that change is articulated by Walter Brueggemann, who's just one of the smartest people that has existed on this earth, as he explained in his writing that space means an arena of freedom, without accountability and void of authority. A lot of us have heard our teenagers say, "I just need my space." Meaning, I don't recognize your authority, get away from me, and don't ask me to do anything, right? Place, on the other hand, Brueggemann says, is space, but with historical meaning. It is a space in which some things have happened which are remembered and which provide continuity and identity across generations. Place is where important words have been spoken, which have established who we are, which have defined our vocation, which have helped us envision our destiny. Place is where vows get made and demands get issued. Place declares that our humanness cannot be found in escape, in detachment, in the absence of commitment, or in undefined freedom. So time and space changed all our perspectives around place and people. The second big bias that happened at the beginning of the Enlightenment and has continued into post-modernity is secularization. We've become more and more secular, meaning we have separated place and creation from God. And what that does is it leaves us with a theoretical God, a God that we think about a lot, a God that we can talk about, a God that we can perhaps imagine, but a God that really doesn't have much to do with our real life, our experiential life. With creation, we have a relationship that's based either on science or profit. Thus, we find it very easy to let go, we as in culture, finds it very easy to let go of our belief in God. And that could not have been imagined before the Enlightenment. In Mark, it was well before these two biases had taken effect. And Jesus is speaking a reality to his disciples that predates these modern perspectives. Their perspective was that they were a covenant people and God acted in both place and creation. That's why they celebrated Passover in Jerusalem. They celebrated Passover with family, with community. They came from all over the countryside to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover together. In God's created order, God begins with place as the seat of relationship. Place is where God meets and shows activity between God and humans, and it is where humans interact with other humans. At least until Facebook or Zoom or FaceTime. But think Garden of Eden. We're created into a place. Abraham's call to leave his homeland happened at a place that he could look up and see the stars and hear God say, "You will have descendants that outnumber the stars." Burning bush, Mount Sinai. All the way through the text, we find God interacting in place. Our faith tradition is far from theoretical. We don't always act that way, but it is. Abraham was chosen to bring a blessing to the nations. The commands were given to Moses so that the people could be shaped into a lifestyle that would bring a blessing to the nations. And the summary of all the law and prophets offered by Jesus was love God and love your neighbor. And that biblical love involved concrete acts for the welfare of another person. Every time people forgot that place was the seat of relationship between God and humanity, every time that we as God's people started putting rituals, ritual worship, the quest for power and authority over others, status that you earned, that you took away from other people, every time we did that, we lost our land or our place. When we came back to God, We received place again, though it wasn't always the same place. Sometimes, if you were exiled, you stayed in the place to which you had been exiled and began to thrive there. God gave you that place to plant and build and grow. It seems that if we aren't holding the sacred together with the secular, that our humanity is so easily lost. Many of you here today have generational roots in this place. Some of you have returned home to this place. Some of you have chosen this place as home. Some of you, like me, live nomadic lives, and you'll be here for today and tomorrow and probably the next day, but who knows what comes next. But what we all have in common is a significant need for place, this kind of location and people that gives our lives meaning. So, the first church that my husband served out of seminary was in a very, very tiny rural town in southeast Arkansas, very close to the Mississippi River. It was the least conflicted church I have ever seen. In the 40 years after, I've never seen a church that was that united. Nobody left because they didn't like the preacher. Nobody left because of a decision coming out of General Assembly. Nobody left because they just didn't feel like going to church anymore. People disagreed, sometimes vehemently, but they kept coming back. So one of the patriarchs of the congregation explained to me once that McGee, Arkansas was kind of a special place, that people and their families had been there for generations. Continuity and identity belonged to them because of their longevity. Their children had been baptized there. They passed on their land to family members. They had spoken these important words that established their identity, that defined their vocation, that envisioned their destiny. And he said, we might have a big old fight in a committee meeting. We might have a big old fight on the bank board. We might have a big old fight because we're neighbors and we get fussy with each other. But you're going to see that person at the grocery store. And you're going to see that person at the bank. And you're going to sit next to that person in this tiny little sanctuary. He concluded by saying, we belong to each other here, and we always will. So we just learn to get along. There's no home like place, like a location that brings together the sacred and the secular, that brings together people sometimes known to us and sometimes yet to be known, that brings together the physical and the spiritual, that brings together the particular and the universal. That's the kind of place that we're talking about. And while it would be amazing to have a generational connection to a place, I'll never have that. And many of us won't have that. But that doesn't mean we lose the opportunity to live intentionally in place and reflect God's kingdom. Because it can happen wherever we are. The sacred surrounds us in this room. Your feet are on the ground. I want you to pay a little bit of attention to your feet touching the floor. And I want you to think about almost 200 years of fellow worshipers whose feet have touched this floor during Sunday morning worship. Children, men, women, siblings, elders. Those relationships beckon us, they shape us, they ground us in God's covenant, and that opportunity awaits us. That gift from God is given to us, and that is what I want us to explore together as we go through the month.